Usually when you look at a landscape, there's this expectation of permanence, right?
Yeah, for sure. You expect it to just be static.
Exactly. Like you look out at a sweeping plain, like the vast, endless steppes of Mongolia, for instance, and it just looks practically eternal.
Untouched.
Right, untouched. You just assume the story of that land moves at, well, the speed of geology, glaciers retreating, rivers slowly carving valleys over millennia.
Yeah, it really feels static. The sheer scale of it kind of tricks the human eye into believing nothing is moving at all.
It totally does. But then you put on beta goggles, so to speak.
Yeah.
You look at the actual numbers underlying that landscape, and suddenly that whole illusion of stillness just shatters.
It completely falls apart.
Yeah. You realize you aren't looking at a static painting at all. You're looking at a swirling vortex of incredibly rapid, almost violent socioeconomic change.
Which is fascinating.
It really is. And that vortex is exactly what we are stepping into today. So welcome to the deep dive. Today we are unpacking an incredibly dense, data-driven diagnostic report.
And it covers a huge chunk of time.
It does, yeah. It tracks over 3 decades of Mongolia's development, spanning all the way from 1990 to 2022.
30 years of data.
Right. And it is this dramatic, high-stakes story of a nation transforming practically overnight from a relatively isolated, landlocked, agriculture-heavy society into this resource-driven, digitally connected 21st century economy.
Yeah, and the visual design of the report itself actually captures this tension beautifully.
Oh, yeah, the layout is really striking.
Right, it's presented with this incredibly clean, highly academic white background. And right in the center, there's this beautifully detailed infographic of the Mongolian map. And it's surrounded by 4 distinct icons representing the economy, education, public health, and the environment.
Which really sets the stage.
Exactly. It immediately tells you that we aren't just looking at a financial ledger here. We are looking at an entire ecosystem of human development.
Okay, let's unpack this, because to truly understand what you, the listener, would see if you walk the streets of Ulaanbaatar today versus, say, 30 years ago, we need to trace the architectural blueprints of this transformation.
We really do.
So, we are going to explore this through 3 distinct conceptual lenses today.
Okay.
First, we have to talk about the absolute dizzying highs and the, frankly, terrifying vulnerabilities of their economic growth. Like, what actually happens when a country essentially straps itself to a geological rocket ship?
It's a very bumpy ride, usually.
Yeah, exactly. Second, we'll look at the people. The fascinating and in some ways completely baffling paradoxes in their human capital, specifically concerning education and gender.
There's some really surprising data there.
Totally. And finally, we have to confront the looming systemic threats, right? The invisible frictions of governance and the highly visible environmental degradation that threatens to just topple the entire structure.
It is a delicate balancing act, and the data reveals exactly where those fault lines lie.
Okay, so let's start with the first lens, the sheer velocity of the money.
The economic roller coaster.
Right. When you look at the raw gross domestic product data starting in 1990, the scale of expansion is almost hard to comprehend.
It's massive.
Between 1990 and 2020, Mongolia's economy expanded more than 3-fold. We are talking about constant 2015 dollars here, moving from roughly 2.4 billion to over 13 billion.
Yeah, and to triple the size of an economy in a single generation, that is to fundamentally rewrite the social contract.
Right, it touches everything.
Everything. It rewrites the physical infrastructure, the career expectations of a youth population, even the daily caloric intake of millions of people. It is a tectonic shift in human existence.
But hold on, when we say an economy tripled, the human brain tends to visualize like a smooth upward slope, right?
Yeah, a nice steady line on a graph.
Exactly. A gentle, reliable climb up a mountain.
Yeah.
But the data shows something entirely different. The growth curve is jagged, it's explosive, and it's highly, highly reactive.
Extremely volatile.
Let me just throw this number out there. In 2011, Mongolia hit a peak GDP growth rate of 15.2%.
Yeah, 15.2. It's wild.
15.2%. For context, a healthy developed economy might be popping champagne over a 2 or 3% annual growth rate.
Oh, easily.
So 15.2% is an economy moving at breakneck speed.
It is. And that speed is entirely dictated by what is in the ground.
So resources.
Exactly. The reason this growth doesn't look like a gentle staircase, the reason it looks more like a heart monitor during a panic attack, with massive spikes followed by sharp drop-offs, is minerals.
Coal, copper, gold.
Right. Coal, copper, gold. When global commodity prices surge or when a massive new mining phase comes online, Mongolia's GDP goes parabolic.
It just shoots up.
But when those global prices drop or when international trade winds shift even slightly, the economy crashes back to earth just as violently. Yeah, the entire national budget basically becomes tethered to the fluctuating price of copper on international exchanges that are thousands of miles away.
Which obviously triggers a massive structural reorganization of the entire country.
Oh, absolutely.
Because you simply cannot have a mining boom of that scale without it completely altering the gravity of the workforce. And this is where the employment data gets incredibly fascinating to me.
A shift is huge.
Right. So in the 1990s, nearly 50% of the Mongolian population was working in agriculture.
Half the country.
Yeah. We are talking about traditional pastoral herding, an agrarian lifestyle that had defined the region for centuries. But by 2020, that agricultural employment number had plummeted to just 27.2%.
Which is a massive demographic migration. I mean, you have hundreds of thousands of people leaving the steppes, leaving the traditional agrarian economy behind.
But here's where the math on employment doesn't quite add up intuitively. Or at least it didn't for me at first.
How so?
Well, you would assume, logically, that if mining and heavy industry are the sectors driving this explosive 15% GDP growth, they must be the sectors absorbing all those former agricultural workers.
That's the standard assumption, yeah.
You imagine this massive shift where everyone just drops their shepherding staffs and picks up a hard hat and a pickaxe to go work in the mines?
Right. But the data on industry employment reveals a crucial blind spot in that narrative.
Okay, break that down for us.
So modern mining, especially the kind of mega projects driving Mongolia's wealth right now, is incredibly capital intensive. But it is not inherently labor intensive in a way that can absorb half nation's workforce.
Ah, I see.
Yeah, they're using massive, highly specialized autonomous trucks, precision drilling equipment, advanced metallurgy.
So it's mostly machines.
Exactly. It requires billions of dollars of machinery and a relatively small crew of highly trained engineers and technicians. It does not require millions of men with shovels.
Okay, so if the workforce didn't go to the mines, where did they go?
They went into the service sector. Yeah. The data shows the service sector has become this massive employment sink. Today, the service sector absorbs over 49% of the entire Mongolian workforce, almost half the country.
Okay, let's break down the mechanics of that, because I think it's a crucial concept to grasp. If mining and heavy industry are the sectors actually generating the primary wealth, the foreign capital entering the country, why is the service sector employing half the population?
It essentially comes down to the circulation of wealth.
The circulation, okay.
Right. The wealth generated by the mines flows primarily into the urban centers, specifically the capital, Ulaanbaatar. So you suddenly have mining executives, foreign investors, logistics companies, and government officials managing mineral rents, all concentrated in the city.
And they all have money to spend.
Exactly. And that concentration of wealth creates an immense secondary demand.
So it's like imagining a giant roaring engine. That's the mining sector, right? It's generating all the raw power, the forward momentum for this massive ship.
That's a great way to look at it.
But it doesn't take that many people to sit in the control room and push the buttons to run that engine. However, the sheer existence of that engine and the massive wealth it produces requires a huge crew of mechanics, cooks, cleaners, retail workers, bankers, teachers, entertainers, just to keep the small crew running the engine and the executives owning the engine fed, housed, and happy.
That analogy captures the vulnerability perfectly, actually.
Vulnerability.
Yeah, because the wealth flows out of the mines and balloons the service sector, banking, real estate, restaurants, healthcare. But if the engine sputters, if copper prices drop on the global market, all those retail workers and baristas and logistics coordinators in the service sector are suddenly highly vulnerable.
Because the money stops flowing down.
Right. They aren't generating primary national wealth. They're circulating it. So if the primary inflow stops, the entire secondary ecosystem stars.
Wow. Which leads us directly into what might be the most sobering concept in this entire analysis. Let's talk about the cost of the boom.
The resource trap.
Yes, the resource trap. Because the data presents a terrifying paradox regarding how this wealth is actually tracked.
Yeah, what's really fascinating here is a specific macroeconomic metric the World Bank uses. It's called adjusted net savings.
Adjusted net savings. Okay, how does that differ from GDP?
Well, traditional economics usually just looks at GDP, which, as we've established, looks great on paper. You dig $1 million worth of coal out of the ground, you sell it across the border, your GDP goes up by $1 million.
Simple enough.
Right. Traditional accounting says you are $1 million richer.
Right, the top line number goes up, the politicians celebrate, the growth charts look fantastic, everybody's happy.
Exactly. But adjusted net savings introduces a much more rigorous and, frankly, a much more honest accounting reality.
Okay.
It asks a fundamental question. Wait, you didn't actually create $1 million out of thin air. You simply moved $1 million from your geological bank account, the Earth, into your financial bank account.
Oh, that's a good point.
So, did you actually take that financial cash
Yeah.
and invest it in a way that builds future wealth? Did you build schools, roads, or renewable energy grids? Or did you just spend it on immediate consumption?
So it factors in the depletion of natural resources as a literal loss of national wealth because once you dig that coal up and sell it, it is gone forever.
Exactly. It treats natural resources as an asset on the national balance sheet. And when you look at the dual-axis charts tracking this over time, the paradox is just staggering.
Lay it on me.
In 2011, exactly when the GDP was growing at that insane 15.2%.
The peak of the boom.
Right, the peak. And mineral rents hit their absolute peak as a percentage of the economy. Mongolia's adjusted net savings didn't surge. It collapsed.
Wait, it collapsed?
It fell into the negative, hitting negative 4.9%.
Negative 4.9%. I really want you, the listener, to let that sink in for a second. During the greatest economic boom in their modern history, when money was supposedly flooding into the country at an unprecedented rate, the data suggests the country was fundamentally making itself poorer.
Yes, on a net basis.
They were depleting their non-renewable resources, literally selling off the foundation, the bedrock of the country, faster than they were converting that cash into sustainable, long-term national wealth like infrastructure or human capital.
It is the ultimate illusion of wealth. To use another analogy, it is like inheriting a massive historic mansion.
Okay.
You want cash, so you start prying the antique mahogany panels off the walls and selling them to buy expensive champagne and designer clothes.
Oh, wow.
For a few years, your lifestyle looks incredibly lavish, right? Your personal GDP, so to speak, is through the roof, but your overall net worth is plummeting because you are destroying the foundational asset you started with.
They were selling the walls of the house to buy champagne. That's chilling. And the vulnerability doesn't stop with just the depletion of resources.
No, it doesn't.
Because the report highlights a giant flashing warning sign regarding fiscal stability. Because the economy is so dependent on this highly volatile mining engine, the government has to borrow heavily. And the external debt figures are staggering.
They really are.
We are talking about external debt skyrocketing from relatively low, manageable levels in the early 1990s to over 200% of gross national income, or GNI, in the 2010s. Over 200%.
Yeah, and to put that in perspective, carrying an external debt load of 200% of your national income places a country on a razor's edge of sovereign default.
It's a massive risk.
It means extreme, almost paralyzing vulnerability to external shocks.
But wait, why would a country with so much mineral wealth need to borrow so much money in the first place? If they're sitting on billions of dollars of copper, why are they taking out massive international loans?
Because you can't just walk out into the Gobi Desert and pick up $1 billion worth of copper.
Fair point.
Developing a world-class megamine requires monumental upfront capital. You have to build the roads to get there. You have to build the power plants to run the massive grinding mills.
And the water infrastructure, I assume?
Yes. Water, worker housing, rail lines to export the product. All of that requires billions of dollars of investment before a single ounce of copper is ever sold.
So the debt comes first.
And debt comes first.
Yeah.
Always. And if the government takes on massive foreign-denominated loans to facilitate this infrastructure, or to smooth out their budget when commodity prices temporarily dip, they get trapped.
Oh, so?
Because if global interest rates rise, the cost simply to service that debt, just to pay the interest, cripples the national budget. It eats the money that should be going to hospitals and schools.
Right.
Furthermore, if the local currency, the tugrik, depreciates against the US dollar, that debt becomes infinitely heavier overnight without them borrowing a single extra cent. The fiscal pressures are enormous. The waterfall charts in the data show debt service expenditures literally eroding the fiscal revenues away.
Wow. So if we synthesize this first conceptual lens, on paper, if you just glance at the top-line GDP, Mongolia looks like a roaring success story of newfound wealth.
The miracle economy.
Right. But when you peel back the layers using metrics like adjusted net savings and external debt ratios, it is a highly fragile wealth. It is a wealth built on volatile rocks dug out of the ground, and it is heavily, heavily mortgaged by international debt.
It is a precarious high-wire act.
Which brings us to the most important question. If the macroeconomy is built on volatile rocks and heavy debt, what about the people?
Yeah. What's happening on the ground?
Exactly. How is this economic whirlwind actually affecting the average citizen? And this leads us to our second lens, the human capital paradox.
This is where we transition from the purely economic to the deeply human. And frankly, the data here is a testament to some monumental achievements, followed almost immediately by some deeply perplexing societal roadblocks.
Let's start with the undeniably good news. When we look at the public health and survival metrics over this 30-year period, the progress is breathtaking.
It's fantastic.
Life expectancy in Mongolia surged from 60 years in 1990 to over 72 years today. Think about the profound nature of that statistic. The system essentially gifted an entire extra decade of life to its citizens.
And those aren't just incremental improvements. Moving a national average from 60 to 72 requires an absolute ground-up overhaul of basic public health.
Right, it's not just a rounding error.
Not at all. It means you have successfully reduced child mortality, improved infant nutrition, introduced widespread vaccination programs, and managed to get basic antibiotics and clinical care out to incredibly remote, nomadic populations, which is no small feat.
And the data on maternal mortality really reflects that logistical triumph. The risk of a woman dying in childbirth dropped dramatically from a terrifying 1 in 56 risk down to roughly 1 in 101.
Which is huge.
It's still higher than a fully developed Western nation, sure, but an astronomical leap in survivability for the population.
And we have to consider the macroeconomic ripple effect of these health gains, too.
Okay, what do you mean?
Well, a 72-year life expectancy completely changes the demographic structure of the country. It means you now have a workforce that can stay productive, retain institutional knowledge, and contribute to the economy for decades longer. It transforms the human capital base from a fragile resource into a highly durable one.
And what is this longer-living, durable population doing with their time? Well, they are going to school.
Yes, they are.
The data highlights the Human Capital Index, which currently sits at a respectable 0.62. But the truly staggering number is the primary school net enrollment rate.
This number is amazing.
It is. Despite the vast, incredibly difficult geography of the country, primary school enrollment has remained incredibly stable at above 97%.
97%.
And youth literacy, 99.5%. Practically the entire young generation, whether they live in a high-rise in Ulaanbaatar or a traditional jur on the steppe, can read and write.
It is a logistical marvel to achieve 97% enrollment in the most sparsely populated sovereign nation on Earth. It really is.
I sense a but coming.
There is a but. However, we have to apply the same rigorous, skeptical lens to this education data that we applied to the GDP data. We cannot just look at the top-line enrollment number and declare victory.
The adjusted net savings of education, so to speak.
Precisely. The report introduces a crucial analytical caveat here called the learning poverty indicator.
Learning poverty.
Yes. And the data shows that a concerningly high percentage of Mongolian children are finishing primary school without meeting standard baseline reading proficiencies.
So they are in the physical classroom, but the actual transfer of knowledge is failing.
Exactly. They built the schools, they managed to get the kids in the seats, which, by the way, often required children from nomadic families to live in provincial boarding dormitories far away from their parents. But what are they actually absorbing?
Right.
This is a classic systemic issue we see in rapid growth developing nations. It is a system that is heavy on access, but light on quality.
That makes sense.
The physical infrastructure of education, the brick and mortar buildings, has vastly outpaced the pedagogical infrastructure. The curriculum might be outdated, the teachers might be undertrained or managing overcrowded classrooms, and the resources to teach complex 21st century problem-solving skills simply aren't there yet.
So you have a massive youth population that is technically literate, but when they graduate and migrate to the city looking for jobs in that ballooning service sector, they find themselves fundamentally locked out of the high-skill, high-wage roles.
Because the quality of their primary education didn't equip them for a digital economy.
Exactly.
It creates a tremendous amount of social friction. You have raised expectations by putting everyone through school, but the economic reality doesn't match the promise.
But the data takes that friction a step further, and this is where we encounter one of the most fascinating phenomena in the entire report. Here's where it gets really interesting.
The gender data.
Yes. Let's look at who is actually succeeding in this educational system, despite the quality issues. When we move to higher education university degrees, We encounter what the researchers call the reverse gender gap.
It's such a striking demographic trend.
By 2020, 36.9% of Mongolian women held bachelor's degrees. Compare that to the men, only 24.6%.
That is a staggering divergence, a more than 12 percentage point gap in favor of women in higher education.
It totally subverts the usual, often, patronizing assumptions outside observers might have about a developing, historically nomadic society. The women are absolutely dominating the universities. They are the ones securing the advanced degrees.
They are. But to understand why this happened, we have to look at the historical mechanics of the nomadic economy during this rapid transition.
Okay, take us back.
When the Soviet-backed system collapsed in the 1990s and Mongolia transitioned to a harsh free market reality, families had to make brutal economic calculations. In a traditional herding family, physical labor is a premium. You need boys to stay back, manage the livestock, ride the horses, and protect the herd from harsh winters. Or, as the mining boom took off, young men could drop out of school and immediately enter the cash economy, driving trucks or working manual labor in the extractive industries.
So the boys were pulled into the immediate physical economy.
Exactly. Girls, on the other hand, were not seen as essential for the heavy physical labor of herding, so families made the strategic decision to send their daughters to the provincial centers to get formal educations.
Oh, wow.
It was seen as their best path to a secure indoor professional job. So over decades, the educational system adapted to this influx and women just excelled.
But here's the blind spot in assuming that educational dominance automatically translates to societal dominance, right?
Yeah.
Because the data reveals a massive systemic bottleneck when these highly educated women try to translate those degrees into actual economic and political power.
The social equity paradox.
Exactly. The labor market data shows that despite holding the vast majority of the university degrees, women in Mongolia shoulder a wildly disproportionate amount of unpaid domestic work.
The household labor balance is heavily skewed.
Heavily. And when you look at representation in parliament or in high-level executive decision-making roles across the economy, the numbers are dismal.
Yeah, they really drop off.
The leadership of the country, the politicians writing the laws, the corporate boards directing the mining wealth, remains overwhelmingly male, despite the actual qualified talent pool being overwhelmingly female.
It is a profound structural contradiction. You have successfully trained an entire generation of highly capable, highly educated women, but the legacy power structures, the old boys networks in politics, the corporate cultures, the deeply ingrained cultural expectations around who is responsible for raising children and managing the household, those institutions are incredibly sticky.
They didn't evolve as fast as the GDP.
They did not evolve at the 15.2% speed of the GDP, not even close.
How can a system successfully educate its women to such a high degree, yet systemically block them from political power and saddle them with unpaid labor? It's an educational victory, but a social bottleneck. It's like building a state-of-the-art high-speed bullet train, that's the educated female workforce, but completely refusing to lay down the modern tracks it needs to actually leave the station.
That's a perfect way to put it.
You have this massive potential energy, this incredible engine for national development, but it has nowhere to go because the social infrastructure hasn't been upgraded to accommodate it. They are trapped at the station.
And overcoming these bottlenecks, allowing that human capital to truly flourish and drive the next phase of the economy, requires more than just passing a new law. It requires an absolute modernization of how the society functions and communicates.
Right.
Which seamlessly bridges us to our third conceptual lens, how these highly educated, increasingly urbanized citizens are connecting with each other and bypassing these legacy physical limitations.
Okay, Section 3. Bridging the divide. Physical needs versus digital leaps. Let's look at the infrastructure data, which is the literal bedrock of living conditions.
The physical infrastructure gains and gaps.
Right. And again, the numbers show massive public health victories side by side with glaring geographical friction. Over this 30-year period, the rate of open defecation plummeted from 20% down to just 4.3%.
Which correlates directly back to those massive improvements in life expectancy and child mortality we discussed earlier.
Yeah.
I mean, sanitation is the first line of defense in public health.
Absolutely. But the data immediately flags a stark, stubborn divide. The urban versus rural access to safely managed drinking water. Ulaanbaatar has modernized rapidly, but the rural steppes lag significantly behind.
And to understand why this gap exists, we have to look at a map. We have to confront the sheer geography of Mongolia.
That's massive.
It is. When we sit in a studio analyzing data, it's very easy to prescribe policy, just build more water pipes, just pave more roads. But Mongolia is the 18th largest sovereign state in the world by landmass, and it is simultaneously the most sparsely populated.
Right.
We're talking about vast, punishingly cold, arid expanses.
Physical terrain is literally fighting the government's attempts to modernize.
Exactly. Laying physical infrastructure water mains that won't freeze in negative 40-degree winters, sewage systems, paved highways across the Gobi Desert or the frozen northern steppes to reach scattered, historically nomadic populations is a logistical nightmare.
I can't even imagine.
It is a fiscal black hole. The Earth itself acts as a barrier to traditional physical development.
Which is exactly what makes the next data point so explosive. Honestly, it might be my favorite statistic in the entire deep dive.
Oh yeah, the digital data.
Yes. Where Mongolia struggled to lay physical pipes through the frozen earth, they absolutely conquered the invisible infrastructure. They executed a massive digital leapfrog.
The acceleration is phenomenal.
Let's listen to this trajectory. Internet usage in Mongolia skyrocketed from essentially roughly 0.1% in the year 2000 to over 73% recently.
Wow.
And the mobile phone data is even crazier. Mobile phone subscriptions are over 100 per 100 people.
Meaning there are more active mobile connections in the country than there are actual human beings.
Yes, broadband adoption and the deployment of secure servers are multiplying at a breakneck pace. It is the equivalent of teleporting past the industrial age directly into the information age.
Teleporting, like that.
Well, because they couldn't easily lay physical water pipes or pave highways across the endless steppes to connect every yurt, they built a digital highway. And in doing so, they practically erased their historical curse of being an isolated, landlocked country stuck between two massive neighbors, Russia and China.
Right.
It doesn't matter if you are thousands of miles from an ocean port if your primary port of commerce is a high-speed fiber optic connection.
And if we connect that to the bigger picture, the implications of this are massive when you connect it back to the human capital data we just discussed.
Oh, true.
Think about the profile of the population. You have a youth literacy rate of 99.5%. You have a massively overeducated female population that is incredibly frustrated by domestic bottlenecks and lack of political representation.
Yeah.
What happens when you hand that specific population a smartphone with broadband internet?
You give them a bypass?
Exactly. This digital transformation is the ultimate tool for a highly literate young population to circumvent their physical and geographic limitations. They don't have to physically migrate to London or New York to participate in the global economy. They can plug directly into the global digital service economy right from Ulaanbaatar or even from a solar-powered steer on the steppe.
That's incredible.
They can freelance, they can code, they can organize politically on social media, completely bypassing the legacy gatekeepers.
So if we take a breath and look at the board, you have a digitally hyper-connected, highly educated population riding the waves of a massive mining boom, rapidly urbanizing into a service economy.
Sounds perfect.
On paper, this sounds like a country poised to absolutely dominate the 21st century. What could possibly go wrong? Well, let's look at the systemic risks the data is flashing red about.
Because a rocket ship doesn't just need fuel, it needs navigation, and it leaves behind a massive toxic exhaust trail. We have to look at the systemic risks.
Which brings us to our fourth lens, the dark side of growth, governance and environmental crises. Let's start with the navigation system, the government.
The institutional data.
Right. The report introduces the WGI, the Worldwide Governance Indicators compiled by the World Bank. It measures institutional efficiency across 6 dimensions, including things like control of corruption, rule of law, and regulatory quality.
And the data here is sobering. According to the WGI, metrics like government effectiveness and regulatory quality consistently hover around negative 0.5 on the standard normal distribution scale.
Now, just to be crystal clear to you, the listener, we are not taking any political sides here. We are just impartially reporting the objective World Bank data regarding institutional efficiency. But explain what that negative 0.5 actually means for a citizen or a business owner on the ground, because it sounds highly abstract.
Sure. In a standard normal distribution, 0 represents the global average. A negative score means the country is underperforming relative to the global mean in terms of how effectively its institutions function.
Okay, but what does that mean in reality?
It means systemic friction. It means if you are an entrepreneur trying to start a business, the permitting process might be opaque, slow, and potentially requires informal payments to move forward. It means if a foreign company wants to invest in a green energy grid, the regulatory framework might be so inconsistent or legally vulnerable that the investment just flees.
Ah, so it is the exact friction that prevents the massive wealth generated by the mining engine from being sustainably managed.
Exactly.
If your institutions are weak, the wealth leaks out. It gets concentrated in the hands of a few rather than building that adjusted net savings we talked about earlier.
Precisely. Without strong institutions, a resource boom almost always becomes a resource curse.
But the friction of governance is invisible. The friction of the environment, however, is deeply, tragically visible.
Very visible.
So what does this all mean? Let's pivot from the political environment to the literal environment, because this is where the data reveals the most shocking statistic of this entire deep dive.
The PM 2.5 numbers.
Yes. Forget the GDP, forget the internet penetration, listen to this public health emergency. Over 97% of the Mongolian population is exposed to PM 2.5 air pollution levels that exceed World Health Organization standards.
That's horrific.
97%.
It is an absolute crisis captured in a single data point. PM 2.5 refers to fine particulate matter, microscopic, toxic particles in the air that are small enough to penetrate deep into the lungs and cross directly into the bloodstream.
And we are talking about Mongolia here, a country historically romanticized as the land of the endless blue sky. How does 97% of the population end up breathing toxic air?
It is the brutal reality of rapidly urbanizing a nomadic population into one of the coldest capital cities on Earth.
Right, Ulaanbaatar.
Ulaanbaatar sits in a valley surrounded by mountains. In the depths of winter, temperatures routinely plunge to -30 or -40 degrees Celsius.
Which is unimaginably cold.
And as hundreds of thousands of former herders migrated to the city over the last 3 decades, they couldn't afford modern apartments. So they set up traditional canvas rudgers or built uninsulated wooden houses on the outskirts of the city.
The Jur districts.
Yes, these sprawling, unplanned, off-the-grid neighborhoods are known as the Jur districts, and they house over half the city's population.
And to survive a -40-degree winter in a canvas tent, you have to burn fuel.
Exactly. And the cheapest, most readily available fuel is raw, unwashed coal. Hundreds of thousands of individual, inefficient iron stoves burning raw coal day and night.
Oh, wow.
Add to that the emissions from the aging, Soviet-era centralized coal power plants and the exhaust from thousands of older imported cars idling in gridlock traffic.
And because the city is in a valley, the cold air traps all of that exhaust.
It creates a severe temperature inversion. The toxic smoke is trapped over the city like a thick gray blanket for months on end. In economic terms, the report identifies these high carbon emissions and toxic urban air environments as massive negative assets.
Negative assets, which brings us full circle to a heartbreaking irony. Remember those massive health gains we celebrated earlier?
The life expectancy jump.
Right, the 12-year jump in life expectancy, the reduction in child mortality. The data shows that those foundational public health victories are now directly threatened by severe respiratory diseases, cardiovascular issues, and impacts on childhood cognitive development caused by this pollution.
It's tragic.
The very coal they are digging out of the earth to drive their GDP up is literally poisoning the air they breathe. The wealth drawn from the ground is coming at the direct cost of the sky.
And the land itself is buckling under the pressure too. The environmental data shows a highly fragile ecosystem being pushed to the absolute brink.
Let's talk about the land use pie charts.
Yes, 74% of the country is classified as agricultural land, but only 9% is forest. And that tiny 9% is shrinking.
And what's happening to the agricultural land? Because we established earlier that employment in agriculture dropped, but the land is still being used, right?
Oh, heavily used. Mongolia is famous for cashmere. As global demand for luxury cashmere surged, herders dramatically increased the size of their goat herds.
Right.
But goats are incredibly destructive grazers. They eat the roots of the grass, preventing it from growing back. This massive overgrazing, combined with climate change altering the delicate precipitation patterns of the steppe, is accelerating desertification.
The desert is growing.
The Gobi Desert is literally expanding northward. Furthermore, the massive water demands of the mega mines in the south are creating intense competition for deep groundwater reserves with the traditional pastoralists.
We are looking at a country that relies on the land for both its traditional agriculture and its modern GDP mining. Yet the data shows they are heavily stressing the very land and water they depend on. It feels fundamentally unsustainable.
I agree completely, and the analysts behind the report clearly reached the same conclusion. You cannot sustain a 21st century economy on an eroding foundation, whether that foundation is institutional integrity or literal topsoil.
You have to pivot.
You have to pivot. And that is exactly why the report concludes not with despair, but with a highly structured, data-driven roadmap.
Which brings us to our final lens, the roadmap to resilience. The report synthesizes all of these complex, interwoven problems into a single, elegant policy flowchart.
A very clear visual.
Yeah. Transitioning from resource-driven to multidimensional-driven.
Yeah.
So let's look at the data-driven escape route. There are 4 pillars of transformation.
Let's break down the mechanics of each. Pillar 1 is debt restructuring and fiscal discipline. The recommendation is stark. Mongolia must aggressively lower its reliance on external debt.
But how do they do that when they still need infrastructure? Like, they still have to build things.
By fundamentally changing how they manage the wealth they already have, the report strongly advocates for the creation and aggressive management of a sovereign wealth fund. They must capture those mineral rents now, while the copper and coal are still flowing, and lock a significant percentage of that wealth away in diversified, global investments before the resources disappear or commodity prices crash again.
Basically, they need to act like Norway did with their North Sea oil money. Build an endowment for the future rather than spending it all on the present. Fix that negative adjusted net savings.
Precisely. Pillar 2 targets education quality.
Right, bringing back that learning poverty issue. The policy goal here isn't just to build more brick-and-mortar schools. I mean, they've already achieved 97% enrollment.
The buildings are there.
The goal now is to fundamentally overhaul the curriculum and invest heavily in modern teacher training to convert that high attendance into actual high-skill labor capable of competing globally.
And crucially, this pillar demands implementing systemic policies that fix the gender employment gap. They have to break down that societal bottleneck and allow their highly educated female population into the boardroom and the parliament. It is no longer just a social equity issue. It is a hard economic imperative.
You can't leave your best players on the bench.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You cannot transition to a high-skill service economy if you leave your best, most educated talent on the sidelines managing household chores.
Absolutely. Okay, pillar 3 is the green transition. And given the PM 2.5 data, this is arguably the most urgent from a pure day-to-day survival standpoint.
It requires massive, immediate investments in clean energy. They have to replace the raw coal heating in the sprawling Jur districts with centralized clean district heating or heavily subsidized renewable electrification.
And clean up the industry.
Yes, they must aggressively regulate industrial emissions and transition their power grid away from legacy coal plants.
And finally, pillar 4, digital governance. This loops back beautifully to that incredible internet penetration rate. The report suggests weaponizing, for lack of a better word, that digital connectivity to attack the governance deficit.
It's a brilliant strategy, really. If you have a population where mobile penetration is over 100%, you use that digital leap to force government transparency.
How does that look in practice?
You roll out comprehensive e-government services, open data portals, digital procurement systems. You remove the human bottlenecks where bribery and opacity happen, and you replace them with transparent, auditable code.
You make the bureaucracy move at the speed of the smartphone rather than the speed of the old boys network.
Exactly. But this raises an important question. A roadmap is just ink on paper, right? How quickly can a nation actually pivot its massive bureaucratic, cultural, and economic machinery when the immediate short-term rewards of just digging more coal out of the ground are so high and so fast? Can a government willingly endure the political pain of structural reform?
Wow. Yeah, it is the defining challenge of their generation. They have the human capital, they have the digital tools, they have the wealth in the ground. And as this report proves, they have the data. They know exactly what needs to be done.
The blueprint is there.
So let's bring this incredible journey all together for you, our listener. We've spent this time unpacking a story of a nation that practically time traveled.
They really did.
From an isolated pastoral economy in the 1990s, they rode a violent 15% GDP economic roller coaster powered by immense mineral wealth. They have built a society that is highly literate, remarkably long-lived, and digitally hyper-connected.
With serious flaws.
Yet, as the data reveals, they find themselves standing at a precarious crossroads, staring down the barrel of crushing external debt, severe ecological degradation, toxic winter air, and legacy governance systems that are holding back their brightest minds, especially their women.
It is a nation of profound contradictions, but also immense, undeniable potential.
Which leaves us with a final provocative thought for you to ponder long after this deep dive ends. Think back to that landscape we started with, the illusion of the static step versus the swirling vortex of the data spreadsheet. We noted that digital connectivity brings ultimate transparency. It flattens hierarchies and exposes inefficiencies. On the other hand, resource extraction, by its very nature, historically and globally, often thrives in the shadows of weak regulation, opaque permitting, and hidden deals.
It's a clash of two eras.
So the ultimate question is this. Will Mongolia's massive, internet-savvy, highly educated youth armed with smartphones and a global perspective be the force that finally drags those governance metrics out of the negative? When the dust finally settles on the steppe and the mines eventually run dry, does the smartphone eventually beat the coal mine?
It is a fascinating conflict of forces, transparency versus extraction.
It really is. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the data. We hope you walk away with a much richer, more nuanced understanding of a truly complex, rapidly evolving nation. Keep questioning the numbers behind the narratives, keep looking past the illusion of the landscape, and we will see you on the next deep dive.